This is what the National Health Service has come to, an eternal begging bowl.
I want some more.
Good evening. The government was in a fevered state today after the trenchant criticism of its health service policy by the Labour peer and famous doctor, Lord Robert Winston. We'll be asking if the government agrees with his view that more tax or even special insurance is needed if we're to have a decent NHS. It's upset Catholics in America and it's about to open here.
Il messaggero è importante.
I'll be talking to the director of Stigmata about the right of the artist to offend as he entertains. And people are rushing to change their lives in pursuit of happiness in the new millennium. But will it work? First, though, the symptoms are persisting. The rash of criticism over the funding and handling of the health service intensified today, producing severe pains for the government. One of the most high-profile medical practitioners in Britain, Professor Robert Winston, recently ennobled by Tony Blair, announced to the New Statesman that Labour had made medical care deeply unsatisfactory for a lot of people. He went on to raise the spectre of a steadily deteriorating service if large amounts of money were not found. Lord Winston spent the day trying to lower the Health Secretary's blood pressure with more soothing words, but the damage had been done. Here's Evan Davis.
Is it a theatre? Is it an airport? Or is it a gallery? No, it's the kind of NHS we all want at Central Middlesex Hospital. According to Lord Winston, we could have it if only there was more money and no internal market. But then managers here admit that doctors are hard to satisfy.
If you're in a profession where we're constantly able to do new things, new techniques which improve patient care, then you're always going to want more. And that's one of the things that we are very good at, developing new techniques. And yet again, this building here today is about building on that.
But running a good health service is harder than the managers here make it look. Take this report we just lifted off Reuters wires today, for example. Hospital emergency wards are critically short of staff and beds and are turning sick patients away in droves. Those lucky enough to be admitted sit neglected in corridors for hours. Ambulances with ill patients line up in parking lots, and nurses have donned black t-shirts to mourn the death of state-funded healthcare. This is actually referring to Canada. The latest overload is being blamed on a flu epidemic, believe it or not. It's actually quite difficult to find countries that are totally satisfied with their healthcare system, even when they spend quite a lot more than we do. Have a look at France, for example. This is Hôpital Franco-Britannique. There in Paris, the problems are different to ours. Customers are generally satisfied, doctors are too. It's the government that isn't, as cost control is terrible. France spends 10% of its GDP on health, Britain only spends 7%.
Because we have an high technology, and everybody can go in an hospital and expecting the best for medical cares, but the costs are high. So what the government now try to do is to put the costs, to keep the costs on the same level, and not to have an increase of costs. So that's a problem. It's a problem of money.
But if you look at how much health we buy, Britain does not fare particularly well. We have one doctor for every 625 of us. Canada has one for every 476. Poland has one for every 416. The US has one for every 384 people. And France and Denmark both have one doctor for every 344 people. And it was only Denmark where we could find general satisfaction today, even though their NHS-type system is not much more expensive than ours.
A few years ago there was an EU study done by the London School of Economics which asked people all over Europe on their satisfaction with their healthcare system, and the Danish answers were clearly the most satisfied, with satisfaction rates either very satisfied or satisfied of above 90%. Maybe it's the way things are organized. The hospitals or the healthcare services are run by regionally elected politicians, which are maybe closer to the public.
Why is health so difficult to get right everywhere apart from possibly Scandinavia? Well, part of that's obviously because it can be a life and death matter. Part of it's because however much you spend, there's always more you can do. Part of it's because technology makes it more expensive year after year, even though it also makes it better. And part of it's to do with the rationing decision. In most things we buy, we make rationing decisions ourselves in how much we spend. In health, that decision's taken centrally by government. Now, just because it's hard to get right doesn't mean we shouldn't try to make it better. A first approach would be more of the same. Modest reforms like the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, more PFI hospitals, and some extra money in the next spending round. Another more left-wing approach is to put up taxes to pay for a better NHS, as suggested by Lord Winston. To sugar the pill down, we might earmark a particular revenue, the NHS tax, to make it more popular. A third approach, the right-wing one, is to encourage us all to pay more for healthcare directly. More charges for basic services, encouragement of private insurance, and more market-oriented reforms within the NHS. Back here at Middlesex, the Chief Executive thinks we could proceed on more than one of those fronts. He wants more resources, and he thinks we can use them more wisely.
Our nurses will assess patients. If they need an X-ray, they'll order an X-ray, they'll read the X-ray, and then give the treatment. Now, that's better than waiting in casualty for a doctor to come to look at the X-ray, tell you what the nurse already knows. 3 hours later, you get your treatment. If a nurse can do that and they're competent, and we make sure we train them to be competent, and there's audit with our senior clinicians, I think we deliver a much better service, which is good for the patient, it's timely, and it's high quality.
Pity the poor NHS. It does get better, and pieces of it are excellent, the medical care as well as the architecture. Reconciling a country's desire to have good care and pay little, though, is not a trick many countries have succeeded in pulling off.
Evan Davis looking at 3 possible ways ahead. Well, I'm joined now by James Johnson, the chairman of the BMA's Joint Consultants Committee and a vascular surgeon, and John Wilman, the author of A Better State of Health, and from Birmingham, the Health Minister, Lord Hunt. Lord Hunt, first of all, the reason the government is so frantic about Robert Winston is because he knows what he's talking about.
We're not frantic at all. I don't agree with what he wrote in the New Statesman, though I do agree with what he said today when he described the legacy we inherited from the Conservative government as being horrendous. And of course that's why it does take time to turn the NHS around. But we have made a start. We've got 37 new hospitals on track for coming into operation in the next few years. More nurses coming into work. We put more money into the health service. Of course there's much more we want to do, but we do have a 10-year programme of modernisation.
The reason that Lord Winston looked so downcast in all the pictures today was because the Labour government lent on him, didn't you?
I've no idea about that at all. What I do know is that the NHS is a very good service. Of course it's under pressure at the moment, but we are making changes, and I'm convinced our 10-year programme will deliver us a very good, excellent service. James Johnson,
is Robert Winston's picture of the NHS as displayed in the New Statesman one you recognise?
I fear that it is. It is dreadfully under-resourced. It isn't just money, but though it comes down to money, we need more hospitals, more beds, more doctors, more nurses, and the inability to cope with a quite modest flu epidemic in the middle of winter is surely something that a reasonably organised health service should not be able not to do.
Do you think, Evan Davis was looking at other countries, but do you think that we do have, when you look around our European counterparts, more of a crisis here?
I think we do, because we simply don't have as much resource to cope with something like this flu epidemic. And the government have got the diagnosis absolutely right. Quite apart from that, there's an awful lot of modernisation that needs to take place. But I don't think they've come clean about what it's going to cost.
But it is a bit of a gift for you, isn't it? Because, if you ask any doctor, I would be hard-pressed to find a doctor who says everything is fantastic, we have enough money, we have enough resources. You always want more. There will always be more treatment. And, as the speed of medical development increases, there will always be better things that you want.
But this isn't medical development. This is putting people who need to be in an intensive care bed in a hospital and rattling in an ambulance and rattling them around the country trying to find the only bed that's left in the southwest or something like that. This isn't the cutting edge of modern development. This is really basic health care that we just are not providing because we're under-resourced.
Lord Hunt, the fact is that people are not getting the health care that they think they deserve at the moment, and there is not much prospect, even though you are putting an extra £20 billion into the health service, of alleviating that problem. Is it out of the question to raise a tax on health?
I think the best way to raise money for the health service is to have a sustainable economy. That's what we have. We see long-term growth in the economy. As a result, the NHS is getting extra resources.
So is the new health service money dependent on growth? And if there's a downturn in the economy, would that consequently mean there was not as much money for the health service?
Well, clearly, the well-being of the economy has an effect on the National Health Service. But at the moment, with the economy in such good shape, we're giving an extra 4.9% per year in real growth. Now, that's much more than Jimmy Johnson and the BMA have ever asked for. And we're seeing real improvements.
Well, John,
it's
let me
not
bring in
just
John
new
Willman.
hospitals,
Yes.
It's more nurses, it's services like NHS Direct. Now, that's only a start. Of course, there are other improvements that we're going to make. But we do have an essential health service. Most people get an excellent service most of the time, and we're going to improve on that.
John Willman, there we have it, an essential health service. But the idea that the health service is universal and free at the point of delivery is only dependent on growth in the economy. I mean, we've just heard that just now. If the economy doesn't grow, then we can forget a lot of the improvements in the health service.
Well, also, I think what we can see is that it's going to grow arithmetically, that what the government has in mind will steadily improve the health service, but people's demands on it are growing geometrically. And it's not just because of things like medical technology improving, it's also because we want to spend more on our health. We're becoming a richer society, and in a richer society people want to spend more on their well-being, their health, not just on food and drink and all the basics.
But are they prepared to pay it in taxes?
Well, I don't think they are prepared to pay it in taxes. I mean, I don't deny that you could perhaps raise extra money from taxes and that the government can't put in more money in the way that it's doing now. But I think the sort of demands that are going to come on the health service over the next 10, 20 or 30 years are going to require taking health spending up from 7% of GDP to perhaps 10 or 12% of GDP, and that can't conceivably come from taxes.
So how does it come then?
Well, people, it seems to me, can afford to spend more of their own money on their health. I'm not in favour of a health insurance scheme, but it seems to me that people have a lot of money in their pockets these days and they could make a contribution to their health costs as they went along.
James Johnson, do you see that as a viable way ahead to say perhaps, what, £10 to go and see the doctor?
Or £10 to be in hospital overnight or something like that. It would raise some money, but the problem is with all these health charges, such as prescription charges, for instance, that about 80% of people using the service are exempt from the charges because they're elderly, because they're children, because they're pregnant women and so on. So it would be exactly the same for any new charges that you introduced. And I think you'd probably end up, because they could only be modest charges, that they probably wouldn't even raise the amount of money that it costs to collect them, because so many people would be exempt.
But do you disagree or agree with John Willman that in this more affluent society, people would still not be prepared to load a little on their taxes to pay for health?
Well, I don't know. I really have no idea. It may well be that a hypothecated tax, an NHS tax, as was mentioned earlier, people might say, well, that is something I really wouldn't mind putting my hand in my pocket for. But I really believe that before we start talking about a completely new form of taxation or anything like that, we ought at least to be spending the same proportion of our national wealth on health that similar countries to ours do. Holland, Belgium, France, countries like that. If we still can't cope with it, we've got up to their level, but we're talking about another 2% of gross domestic product. If we still can't cope with it then, perhaps we need to think of other ways of taxation. But that does seem to me to be the first step to get us up to the same level as other countries.
Philip Hunt, you do say, and repeatedly, the improvements that Labour are planning to make in the health service in the next 10 years, but it is not increasing a proportion of our GDP to the extent, for example, of places like Germany to achieve it. Why not?
Well, other countries are very wasteful in the way they spend their money on health services, and many of them employ armies of bureaucrats to actually raise that money through insurance schemes. We have a cost-effective system. We need to build on that. We are putting more resources in. We're beginning to see improvements coming through. The next 10 years will see some very exciting developments in the NHS. I'm convinced it has an excellent future.
But the next 10 years will also see an increase in demand for new and perhaps expensive treatments that are being reviewed one by the government. For example, things like Taxol for breast cancer and Ritulec. And we've already heard that we still are going to have postcode rationing because some health authorities simply will not be able to pay for these drugs and give them to their patients, whether or not you approve them.
No, this is an example of where the UK is leading the world. Because we have the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, we are able to be advised on which treatments are the best, which are the most cost-effective.
But they may not be available for patients because different health authorities won't be able to afford them.
But the whole process is designed to ensure that we spend our money where it's going to be most effective.
James Johnson.
Well, Philip Hunt says that the systems in Western Europe are wasteful. There was a programme within the last week which went over to Calais, which looked at where they also have a flu epidemic. There were no cancellations of surgical operations. Everyone who needed a hospital bed got one. But this government, and indeed the previous government, regard that as wasteful because there's enough slack in the system to cater for emergencies. This clearly isn't wasteful. It's just the proper way to run a healthcare system. And we have to understand that.
Finally, John Wilman, in 5 years' time, will we have to have some alternative?
I think charging will come in one way or another, and if it doesn't, lots more people will opt out of the health service.
Thank you all very much indeed. Stigmata, the latest in a rush of films about organised religion and the Catholic Church in particular, has caused a furore among Christian groups in America. The controversy over Stigmata has predictably boosted box office takings and increased its chances of doing well when it opens here next Friday. The film is a roller coaster of blood and special effects. It was described by one critic as an MTV version of The Exorcist. So is it now open season on religions in Hollywood? I spoke to Stigmata's director and quoted him back what he had said about the film. You said this movie is going to be to the Vatican what the movie JFK was for the Warren Commission. Is that not just a bit self-regarding?
Yes, of course it is. But as a filmmaker, you're kind of obliged to be a little bit self-regarding just to try and get the word out there. What I really meant by that was that the Vatican has a lot of information about the origins of Christianity, and a lot of it they don't let out. And in these secret archives, their choice of word, not mine, there is a huge amount of information which I think would be very interesting to Christians of all styles, all denominations. And I just think that it's about time that the Vatican was really much more open about Jesus, our knowledge of Jesus, the history of Jesus, the words of Jesus, all the different gospels, what's apocryphy, what's heresy, what's standard.
Frankie? Frankie. Who are you? Il messaggero è importante.
Beneath it's very, very seductive imagery. There isn't a real attempt to uproot the basic faith of people in the church, that the church is founded by Christ. So I think there's an agenda beneath it there. And I think that subliminally it gives the message that the church is an evil institution. It's a corrupt institution. And I think that for Catholics and for other people who love the church, that is profoundly offensive.
With Stigmata, what you were essentially saying was that the church, and in particular the Vatican, is a conspiracy against the true teaching of Christ. I mean, you must have known that that would cause huge offence to many Christians.
Well, I don't know so much that we say that there's a conspiracy within the Vatican to suppress the true words of Jesus Christ. What we specifically say at the end of the
really?
Well, what we say at the end of the movie is that the Gospel of St. Thomas, which is what our fictional gospel is based upon, is an important document that some people regard as closer to the true words of Jesus Christ and some people regard as heresy. I don't know, I'm not a New Testament theologian, but I do know that a lot of people on both sides of the Atlantic and even in Rome believe that the Gospel of St. Thomas is an invaluable part of how we understand who Jesus is. And I also know that the Vatican is very keen to, let's just say, ignore. Repress is kind of an old-fashioned word because it's impossible to repress things now. But they're very keen to ignore that aspect of the New Testament. And I think that's a mistake.
In America, the film you've had protests and so forth. I mean, surely, in a sense, that could be part of the plan because controversy is nothing but good for a film.
That's exactly what I thought, and I have to say that I was told quite sternly that that wasn't the case. If you have a smaller movie, and a good example would be Priest, which is a movie that cost around about the $2 or $3 million mark, controversy is good because the audience that you need to return your money is not that high, so you need to get an awareness out there. With a movie that's a bit more of a mainstream budget, sort of under $30 million, you really want a larger population going there. And if they think it's a quote-unquote controversial religious movie, most people won't go and see it.
It hasn't done you any harm.
It hasn't done us any harm, no, but the studio actually really tried to push it as a supernatural thriller rather than a controversial religious look at the inner workings of the Vatican. And in terms of the people who were protesting the movie, there was a very, very, very small group which is called the Catholic League. And when we were testing the movie, we found that Catholic people enjoyed the movie even more than non-Catholics. So I don't know whether Catholics find this movie offensive or whether it's just the Catholic League that finds this movie offensive. And I don't really know very much about the Catholic League, but I suspect that they're one of these self-appointed watchdogs that sort of decides what people should and shouldn't see. Again, that's not something I'm very pro, so I can't be upset about offending them.
Well, there have now been a spate of films which take a much more, as it were, critical and cynical view of organised religion or the way religion operates.
By walking through the archway, all your sins are forgiven. Then all we have to do is die.
Die? I don't want to die.
What, you'd rather hang around here for a few more years?
No, we don't even know if we can die. All right, but what if we can, and then the arch thing doesn't work? What then, hell?
The rules of engagement have changed over the past 20 or so years. Hollywood has certainly become less sympathetic to a straightforward portrayal of the gospel and of the church. It's looking for a new angle. There's a desperate search for a new, unusual way of treating the issue of religion and of faith. So if you said a film like Last Temptation, it doesn't take the straightforward gospel account. It mixes it with all kinds of Gnostic and apocryphal accounts and blends it together into this sort of pop gospel.
Do you think that now Hollywood is less timorous about being critical about religion?
Obviously, at the end of the 90s, people are a little bit more, they want to look underneath underneath the lid. In terms of cynical and critical, I don't believe that you have to be cynical to be critical. My view of I'm fascinated with the Vatican, I'm fascinated with Christianity, I'm fascinated with Catholicism. I don't have a remotely cynical view, but I do believe that in an organization as big as the Vatican, there are bound to be some people who are a little bit more reactionary than others. And those reactionary people, when they're in power, are bound to be people who are less interested in handing information out. That's my view of the organization. That doesn't mean to say that every single person inside it is someone who I view cynically. And I think if you look at the movie as a whole, you see that there's a whole range of priests who have very different approaches to religion. And by and large, most of the priests in the movie Stigmata are very worthy, intelligent, caring, sensitive people. So I don't believe that it's a cynical view of the Catholic Church.
But do you think anything goes now, that it is possible really to say anything you want about religion?
Well, I think it's better that anything goes than 200 or 300 years ago when you could be literally burned for saying that the earth goes around the sun. So I think if the pendulum's got to swing one way or another, it's better that people are free to say what they think now. By and large, I'm not a huge fan of censorship, and I don't believe that religion should be more privileged than politics or personal beliefs or any of those different things that we view as sort of holy cows. So I think it's good that people should say what they think about religion. I think it's good that people in religion should have the freedom to answer back and go, hey, you're wrong, or I disagree with you, or I think what you're saying is disgusting, or whatever. I think that a frank, exchange of views to do with all of the aspects of our life is critical to a civilized community.
Well, there's no doubt that on certain subjects, Hollywood still is uneasy. I mean, my understanding was that MGM were concerned about this film. They didn't think it was going to make, a bucket load of money. Was that because they were concerned about the controversy, or they were worried about the actual quality of the film?
You know what happened was we got kind of stuck between two different regimes, and the regime that made the film resigned just before the movie came out, and the regime that took over, the first thing they did was they looked at all the films they had, and they really wanted to make sure that they had them placed in the best possible way. It's kind of standard when a regime takes over a studio to say, well, gee, I think that we would have made better films if we'd been here earlier. So I don't think the fact that they weren't really enthusiastic about the movie to start off with is particularly extraordinary.
So you don't think they were flinching? I mean, because Dogma was dropped by Disney. I mean, you don't think they were flinching from the religious nature of the film?
No, I don't think they were, because I think they always saw it. They could always sell this as a supernatural thriller rather than a religious movie. Obviously, I mean, it's called Stigmata, that's a religious term. It has religious elements all the way through it. It's got a priest as the lead character. They knew
It's got some
that.
amazing special effects as well. I mean, there is a lot of blood in this film in various spurting out in various ways.
There's about as much blood that you will see as if you go into a Catholic cathedral and look around. Probably no more or less than any stained glass window.
Let me just move you on to the subject of other faiths, because it seems that there has now been a number of films which are taking, as it were, a more critical or more incisive look at Christianity. But do you think that you could make the same sort of film about a religion other than Christianity? Could you make the same sort of film about Islam or Judaism?
Well, if I was a Jew, I think I'd feel free to make a movie that was critical about Judaism. If I was a Muslim, I think I'd be a little more careful about making a movie that was critical about Islam.
You've been a wonderful audience. I was tremendous, it has to be said. I really was. But seriously, I have to say, on a more serious note, if you do laugh at an ethnic comedian, you've warmed to their culture. And I hope by being here a few minutes, you've all kind of warmed to Islamic fundamentalism.
You can always make fun of people, because people are subject to foibles. People have humanity, and people always do things that are wrong and always do things that are worthy of analysis or comic piss take, if you like. But I do believe that whilst that's the case, you can't really, or at least where I'm personally uncomfortable, you can't really attack central figures of faiths which so many people hold sacred. And I've seen certain comedians have a go at Jesus Christ, say, oh, Jesus Christ, what a... and I've used, a bad word about them. And that's always maybe a bit uncomfortable, but simply because so many people hold Christ as sacred. And I think it's okay, for me the boundary is, it's okay to make fun of the people, but it's not okay to make fun of the central figures of a faith.
I think it's open season now in terms of how Christianity is depicted. Since The Last Temptation in 1989, there really are no rules as to how Christianity should be approached. There were very, very strict rules, unwritten rules in the past, but these have been thrown away now, and it's open season for any filmmaker to approach Christianity in any way they like.
I think that you should really only make quote-unquote critical films about the religions that you know more about. I mean, I think it would be utterly disrespectful for me to make a film that was critical in any way of Judaism or any of the other great world religions, because I'm not a Jew, I'm not a Muslim. So, but I am a Christian, and I was raised in that religion, so I know a little bit more about that. And I don't think it's irresponsible or disrespectful to look further into that religion and go, is the truth there as we've been told? Maybe not.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
And Stigmata opens all over Britain next Friday. In a moment, a new you.
I've got to get myself together for the millennium. I've got to get the dress, I've got to get the venue, and I've got to get the divorce.
For a new millennium, but will it make you happy? But first, a look at the day's main news stories.
Good evening. One of Scotland's richest men has come under fire from politicians and gay rights activists for offering to bankroll a campaign to keep the law stopping schools from promoting homosexuality. It's thought Brian Souter, the founder of the Stagecoach Bus Company, is contributing as much as £500,000 to the Scottish School Board Association's bid to retain the measure called Section 28. The government say they remain committed to repealing it.
Brian Souter, here on song at an STUC conference, is a self-made multimillionaire. The father of 4 is a devout Christian and a member of the Evangelical Church of Nazarene in his hometown of Perth. His reasons for bankrolling the retention of Section 28 campaign are being relayed through the public relations company now organising it.
Brian Souter, as a father and as a concerned citizen, is using his money to help maintain a safeguard that he thinks has benefited Scottish school children for many, many years, and to remove it simply increases the risk to our children. And I think that's something that no parent in Scotland wishes to see happen.
The battle for future classroom debates has pitted bodies like the EIS, the STUC and the Scottish Parent Teachers Council, which favour scrapping Section 28, against opponents who include some church groups and the Scottish School Boards Association. The statute prohibits local authorities promoting or publishing material which intentionally promotes homosexuality. Specifically, it must not promote the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. Gay rights campaigners claim that in practice this law legitimises intolerance and prejudice. The Scottish Executive has described it as Scotland's badge of shame and says its repeal has nothing to do with promoting homosexuality. Gay activists suggest Brian Souter's intervention at this stage is a disturbing development for Scottish democracy.
The Labour peer who criticised the government's record on health has moved to dampen down the controversy surrounding his remarks. The fertility expert Lord Winston, who was ennobled by Tony Blair, told the New Statesman magazine that New Labour had deceived the public on the state of the health service. But today he insisted the government was moving in the right direction. A survey vessel equipped with remote cameras is expected to arrive at the site of the wreck of the Solway Harvester next Tuesday to help with the investigation into the tragedy. Bad weather conditions in the Irish Sea have prevented any progress on the planned underwater survey. Officials on the Isle of Man say that if the bodies of any of the 7 fishermen are found, they will be recovered and brought home to their families. The International War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague has sentenced 5 Bosnian Croats to up to 25 years in prison each. The men were found guilty of crimes against humanity for their part in a brutal massacre of more than 100 people in a Bosnian village in 1993. 2 of the men were also convicted of murder.
The massacre at Ahmici in 1993 was one of the most notorious atrocities of the Bosnian War. 100 Muslim civilians, including women and children, were murdered and burned by Bosnian Croat soldiers. Not a single Muslim home was spared in a rampage that lasted several days.
What happened on the 16th of
Delivering his judgment at the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague, Judge Antonio Cassese said Ahmici had gone down in history as one of the most vicious illustrations of man's inhumanity to man.
The trial chamber sentences you, Mr. Vladimir Šantić, to 25 years imprisonment for persecution as a crime against humanity.
Šantić was found to have played a commanding role in the attack on Ahmici and to have personally committed murder. 4 other former Bosnian Croat soldiers were given jail sentences ranging from 6 to 15 years, all guilty of crimes against humanity.
The Moors murderer Myra Hindley is expected to remain in Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge over the weekend after 4 hours of treatment today for a potentially fatal brain condition. Doctors are treating her for the swelling of an artery at the base of the brain. A spokesman told reporters that Hindley's stay had not disrupted normal business. The Foreign Office has named Thomas McNeely from Coatbridge as one of the 5 Britons who were killed in yesterday's plane crash off the Libyan coast. A total of 17 bodies have so far been recovered. A search is continuing for 5 others still missing, including 1 more Briton. 7 British oil workers were on board the Swiss plane, have survived.
They were on a flight from the capital Tripoli to the oil refinery at Marsa El Brega. Just 6 miles short of the airport, the pilot radioed that both engines had failed and he was attempting an emergency landing in the sea. The plane sank in 50 metres of water, but not before nearly half the passengers and crew had escaped. The plane, a Shorts ST360, has a good safety record. Nicknamed the Shed for its boxy look, it's known as simple but reliable. At least 100 are still used around the world and they've been a favourite for commuter flights in Britain. This is the actual aircraft. When it's recovered from the seabed, investigators will want to know why both propellers stopped. Fuel contamination or blockage could be the cause, as this would affect both engines. The British government has offered our own crash investigation facilities at Farnborough to help discover the cause. They're sending 2 investigators to join the Libyan team.
A Spanish judge seeking the extradition of the former Chilean dictator General Augusto Pinochet has requested a second medical examination be carried out. The judge said the new tests should be done by a team which includes doctors appointed by the Spanish High Court. Earlier this week, doctors in Britain found that the former dictator was unfit to stand trial. Opposition politicians and the teachers' union, the EIS, have condemned the government's decision to use money originally allocated to schools to fund a rescue package for Scottish Opera. The executive has confirmed that £2 million earmarked to reduce class sizes was used instead to keep the opera company afloat. And that's it from us for tonight. Gordon will be back with a full-length Newsnight Scotland on Monday. Until then, enjoy your weekend. Good night.
Barely had the strains of Auld Lang Syne faded than the rush to the divorce course began. That, at any rate, has been the experience of divorce solicitors and the relationship counsellors relate since the new millennium was ushered in by countrywide parties and queues of the great and the good at the Dome. Gripped by the desire to chase happiness in the new millennium, people aren't just splitting up, they're changing their jobs and leaving parts of their bodies they no longer want to live with.
It did affect my confidence because it just stuck out so far and makes you wonder if anyone's going to be put off by that. My name's Paul Hitchman. I've changed my life by starting a new century with a new nose. Going out with women, if you're walking past a mirror or shop window and you see yourself in profile, you know, it used to stick out in profile and I never liked that. And when I had the opportunity to do something about it, I knew it would make me feel better about myself. It was quite painless. And there was just one night in the hospital, and that was it. It was done. It's taken away what I consider the defect.
You can spend thousands on drugs, psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, but why not just fix their nose?
It's a sense of starting anew, a feeling of newness, getting rid of the old, and just reshaping yourself.
A new nose for a new millennium. Well, I'm joined now by Ben Renshaw, who's a happiness counsellor and coordinator of happiness, who goes into different companies to talk to people about happiness, and by Michael Argyll, who's Professor of Psychology at Oxford Brookes University. You're a happiness guru. Ben Renshaw, first of all, is there any research which suggests that surgery, cosmetic surgery, can make you happier?
Not that I'm actually currently aware of, and I must say I'm slightly sceptical that a new nose will guarantee you newfound happiness. I'm sure that maybe short term it might feel as if it's a bit of a quick fix, but personally I actually feel that happiness goes way beyond just a new nose.
But surely, Michael Argyll, if something is distressing somebody and making them overtly unhappy, something as simple as that could easily, as it were, give them, well, maybe not a long-term fix, but the kind of fix that they need to go on.
Well, as a hard-boiled empiricist, I like to see the data, and I'd like to see some follow-up studies of people before and after their noses were fixed. I don't think that's ever been done. Might work.
But what essentially would be wrong with pursuing that form of happiness?
Well, I don't think intrinsically there's anything wrong with it, but I do think that people, again, I'm quite cynical of a new millennium, a new start, a new you, and I actually think that, certainly from my own experience, that yes, there are many factors that can contribute, you know, to feeling happy, but really I do believe that happiness does come from within, and that's got to be your starting point.
Well, that was certainly a case of a body change, but now let's have a look at our second case, because it's not just our bodies we're trying to change.
There was a large gap there as well, which needed to be filled, where I needed to do something which I found interested me and was useful. I didn't feel that what I was doing was useful. I'm Pam Peacock. I'm changing my life by giving up my job working in a call centre to travel to Hubei province in China to teach English. What I found with my old life was that it was very, very, very routine. It didn't make any calls on my imagination, it didn't make any calls on my knowledge, it didn't make any calls on any talents which I might have. It was a very, very mundane job which I was doing. I think very much it's fear that holds people back. You know, I'm okay where I am at the moment and I might not be so okay if I go for something. So there's this tension, there's this urge of wanting to do something and the fear that's sort of holding you in, thinking, well, can I actually do it? Should I actually do it? The risks involved.
I said, rip it up and rip it up, rip it up and rip it up, rip it up and start again.
A lot of people are reevaluating their lives. They want to make a clean break. They want to change, have whole new experiences. And this is certainly one way that they can do that.
I think people maybe see it as a page-turning exercise and they're thinking, well, it's time for a new beginning. We've got a new blank page for this millennium. What can we write on it?
A very optimistic Pam Peacock. Well, Michael Argyll, how important is the place of work to people's happiness?
Right, this is much more important, yes. Jobs give great satisfaction to those who have the good jobs, and this lady was mentioning call centres. This is a very undesirable trend, I think. This is very boring, repetitive work. And the kind of job that is satisfying, like your job, for example, you can use your skills, you have a lot of freedom, you see some results from it. Well, those jobs are jolly good, but others are not so good.
But people presumably have a kind of an absolutely understandable fear of change. What Pam Peacock did was she used the millennium as a kind of impetus to make a radical change in her working environment. I mean, was that a good thing?
Well, I'm sure that's a good thing, but it's quite difficult to do, isn't it? I mean, to get a job at all for some people is jolly difficult.
Well, is the lesson not here for people who run call centres who are watching is to make sure that they don't have lots of Pam Peacocks and essentially to make the place of work, whatever you're working in, happier?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's about, we're not all in the position where we can go and, give up our lives, and we might not want to go and, live and work in China. But I think we can do practical things on a daily basis that contribute to our happiness. Which
well, you give some free advice to the call centre. How could they have improved Pam's feeling about working in such a place?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think firstly, outlook, your perception, the way that you see your job, and if you just see it as a dead end with no opportunity, I think immediately you're going to feel you're not going to feel so positive. So start, just in terms of your perception, make the decision to see opportunity.
But I mean, let's be hard-nosed about it, Michael Argyll. If the salary was really brilliant, would it be so painful and boring working there?
Oh, that helps, of course. But more important than salary is the relation with the other people at work. Now, I think that the workmate relations, the gossip, the jokes, the fooling about is terribly important, and not only makes them happier at work, but leads to more work because they help each other and they cooperate.
Well, work is not the only relationship that a person has. Finally, let's take a look at what the millennium has done for our other relationships.
Those little habits that in the beginning you find so endearing suddenly become totally irritating and you think, oh, not again.
I'm Bridget Rowe and I'm starting a new company and I'm starting the new century as a single woman. I consciously made the decision in 97 really that I've got to get myself together for the millennium. I've got to get the dress, I've got to get the venue, and I've got to get the divorce.
Do you, Melanie, promise to honour and remain faithful to this marriage?
We could get to the stage where people who stay married are thinking, oh my goodness, I'm still married. What am I going to do about this? Is this a problem? So I do think people have role models and heroes and heroines, and they think, well, if they can do it, I can do it.
At the
start of January 2000, they've all rushed in to start a new life, dawn of a new age, and we can't cope with the numbers of people that are coming in to get divorced.
I was thinking, this has got to be over with by New Year's Eve. I have got to be hearing Big Ben and thinking, yes.
Ben Renshaw, the cost, or should we say the benefit of a stable marriage apparently is it's worth £100,000. But how much does happiness relate to personal relationships?
Oh, I think it's very significant. I feel quite saddened by the fact that people think that a divorce is the answer to their happiness. And I think that relationships, it takes tremendous commitment and work. And I think it's very easy to get a divorce and go and repeat the same patterns in another relationship.
But Bridget Rowe, clearly she was determined. I mean, she'd made this decision in 1997 that she was going to offload her husband by the millennium.
And had she communicated with him? Had she really made the choice to work through that together? Maybe they, I'm not saying it's, it's maybe that for her really is right, but there are options and choices.
Well, but Michael, what if by making such a radical decision, Bridget Rowe has now guaranteed herself happiness for the rest of her life?
In a minority of cases, I'm sure this may be right. They've married the wrong person, young or something. But for the majority, this is a ghastly mistake, because the most unhappy people are the divorced. And those most likely to be locked up inside mental hospitals are the divorced. Far more likely.
What about the idea that we're somehow in a way genetically predisposed to happiness? That you're either someone who thinks the glass is half full or you think the glass is half empty?
We are to some extent. Yes, twin studies have found that. It's not a major factor, it's a factor. We're a bit led that way, true.
Everybody says, and you would say that it comes from inner happiness, but there must be things, the way we conduct our leisure, the way that actually contributes to our happiness. I mean,
right, I'm backing...
A recipe for genuine... You're backing leisure?
I'm backing leisure, not because it's more important than anything else, but because it's you can do something about it very easily. You can change it today. Take up Scottish dancing, for example.
Is that what you do?
Yes, amongst other things. Yes.
Very
successful.
But people might feel that they don't have it within them to change the path they're on. I mean, all change is seen initially as deprivation. How do you encourage people to change in a gradual way which is sustainable?
I have no idea. But if they do it, it's jolly good.
Well, Ben, you make your money out of a gradual change program.
Yes, I think it's reviewing, taking a stock check of where you are, reviewing all areas of your life, your work, relationships, how you feel about yourself, looking at your options and choices. And then I think that a very important starting point, though, is to be thankful for what you already have. It's so easy today to get caught up in the dream and the fantasy of tomorrow. When you've made all these changes, then you'll be happy. I think that's often the illusion. And by appreciating what you already have today, counting your blessings, it makes a huge difference.
Well, Michael Argyle, by and large, we are getting a wealthier society. Are we becoming a happier society?
Slightly. The biggest study I know of, done by the people in Warwick University, has shown a small increase in life satisfaction over the last few years. So we're doing quite well. And we're much happier than people in France, Germany or Italy think they are. We have a relatively...
Why is that?
Oh, I don't know, very deep question. It takes some time to sort that one out. We have quite a low rate of suicide here. We have quite a low rate of alcoholism. We're doing quite well, I reckon. And quite low rate of unemployment, actually, compared to most other countries. I think we're doing all right.
Well, long may it continue. Thank you both very much indeed. And just time for tomorrow morning's front pages. And not such a happy story in the front of the Times. Number 10 tries to gag peer over NHS, according to the Times. The Telegraph, NHS attack puts Blair on the rack. Number 10 forces Lord Winston to recant. The Guardian has a story, public sector pay boost. Moving on to the Daily Mail, damn lies in Labour. Alistair Campbell bid to stifle health attack backfires. The Mirror has it as nobbled. Number 10 forces Winston backtrack. That's all from Newsnight tonight. Jeremy Vine will be back with more on Monday. Until then, from all of us here, have a very good weekend and a happy one.
Prime Minister Tony